Returning from the battlefield with a life-altering injury, I thought my struggles had reached their peak. But nothing could prepare me for the heartbreak awaiting me at the hospital. My wife, Elise, arrived with a demeanor colder than the metallic click of the door handle, delivering papers that would shatter what was left of my spirit. Her sneer and icy words, "I don't love you anymore. Stay away from me and our children," echoed louder than any explosion I'd faced overseas. A decade later, at my daughter's wedding, fate handed me an opportunity to deliver an unforgettable reckoning to Elise and her entire treacherous clan. The military hospital room was cloaked in a heavy stillness, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The pale evening light streamed weakly through the curtains, casting dull golden rays onto the sterile walls. I lay there, my body heavy with exhaustion and the torment of phantom pain from the leg I no longer had. Despite the discomfort, I clung to a fragile hope that Elise would come. Our conversations had dwindled after the blast that ended my military career. Her messages, once warm and frequent, became terse and infrequent over the months I spent overseas. I reassured myself, thinking she was preoccupied with caring for our two children, Emma, 6, and Lucas, 4. When the door finally creaked open, I managed a faint smile through the pain. Elise stepped inside, immaculate as always, dressed in a tailored navy blouse and pencil skirt, her makeup pristine. Relief surged through me. She hadn't abandoned me, but the relief was fleeting. Her expression was void of warmth. She didn't rush to my side or even meet my gaze the way she once had. Instead, she reached into her expensive handbag and withdrew a thick envelope, placing it on the bedside table with a dispassionate thud. "Sign these," she said flatly. Her voice was devoid of emotion. With unsteady hands, I picked up the envelope, confusion washing over me. "What is this?" I asked. "Divorce papers," she replied, her tone cold and detached, as if she were reciting a list of errands. "I don't love you anymore, Arthur. It's over." The air felt like it had been knocked from my lungs. "Elise, what are you saying? We have a family. We have Emma and Lucas." She laughed, a sharp and bitter sound. "A family? Don't kid yourself. Do you honestly think I've been sitting around waiting for you, playing the perfect wife while you were off in some godforsaken desert? James has been more of a husband to me than you ever were." Her words struck like bullets. "James?" I managed to whisper, recognizing the name. James was her colleague, a polished executive from her finance firm. I'd met him once, briefly, at a company dinner. His charm and confidence had unnerved me then, but I brushed it off as baseless jealousy. "You've been seeing him?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Don't be dramatic," she replied, rolling her eyes. "James is a real man. He provides for me and the kids. You're nothing now, Arthur, a broken soldier with no future. Stay away from us." Her words carved deeper wounds than any I'd endured on the battlefield. As she turned to leave, I called after her, desperation cracking my voice. "Elise, don't do this. Think of Emma and Lucas." She paused at the door and glanced over her shoulder, her lips curling into a sneer. "I already have. They're better off without you." The door slammed shut, taking with it every piece of the life I believed in. The year following her departure was a haze of anguish. Elise sold our home and took the lion's share of the proceeds. I relocated to a dingy flat on the outskirts of London, surviving on my military pension. She severed all communication between me and my children, feeding them lies that I had walked out on them. The lowest point came when I stumbled across a photo on social media. Elise, James, and my children at a lavish beach resort. Emma sat on James's lap, her smile radiant, while Lucas clung to his arm. My heart shattered, realizing they now saw him as their father. Yet, when you hit rock bottom, something inside you begins to shift. Giving in to despair would have been easy, letting Elise's betrayal define my life. But I chose a different path. Instead of surrendering, I threw myself into rebuilding my future. I enrolled in a finance program, channeling the discipline and resilience I had honed in the military. Despite the unrelenting ache of loss, I worked with unwavering focus, determined to create a life that mattered. It wasn't without struggle. Sleepless nights haunted me, filled with the memory of Emma's joyful laughter and the feel of Lucas's tiny fingers clasped in mine. Still, I pushed forward, reminding myself daily that my efforts weren't solely for me. One day, I would prove to my children that I hadn't abandoned them. By the time I reached 45, I had climbed to the position of managing director at a prestigious investment firm. I owned a luxurious home and drove a car that turned heads. From the outside, my life appeared enviable, but an emptiness lingered, the absence of my children. One crisp autumn morning, my assistant walked into my office, carrying an ornate envelope. Its elegant design and fine craftsmanship were impossible to miss. She handed it to me with a raised eyebrow. Intrigued by the unusual delivery, I opened it carefully, my hands trembling slightly as my heart raced. Inside was a handwritten invitation, the gold calligraphy forming graceful swirls on creamy paper. Mr. Arthur Grayson, you are cordially invited to the wedding of Emma Grayson and Daniel Harrington. The event was scheduled for 6 months later at a grand estate in the English countryside. My hands shook as I read and reread the invitation. It had been over a decade since I last saw Emma. Did she truly want me there? Or was this Elise's way of twisting the knife further? The idea of confronting Elise and James made my stomach churn, but I knew this was an opportunity one couldn't ignore. If there was even the slightest chance to reconnect with Emma, I had to take it. When the day arrived, I drove to the manor feeling equal parts nervous and hopeful. The venue was breathtaking. Manicured gardens surrounded the stately building, and guests mingled in elegant attire, their laughter carrying through the air. Despite my polished suit, I felt like an outsider among them. I spotted Emma almost immediately. She looked radiant in her lace wedding gown, her golden hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. My heart ached with pride and longing. But as I observed her interacting with Elise and James, a pang of unease hit me. On the surface, she seemed happy, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, a shadow of something unspoken. Staying on the sidelines, I avoided drawing attention to myself. When Emma finally noticed me, her expression froze for a moment before she hesitantly approached. "Dad," she said softly, uncertainty lacing her voice. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Emma, you look absolutely beautiful." "Thank you for coming," she replied, though her tone was unsure, as if she hadn't entirely decided how to feel about my presence. Before I could say more, Elise materialized, her arm entwined with James's. Her tone was dripping with mockery as she said, "Well, isn't this a surprise? Arthur, I didn't think you'd have the gall to show up." I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice steady. "I'm here for Emma." Elise's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you are. Let's keep things cordial, shall we? We wouldn't want to ruin her special day." With that, she sauntered off, James trailing behind her. He shot me a smirk and muttered, "Nice seeing you, Arthur. Enjoy the party." My fist tightened, but I forced myself to remain composed. This wasn't the time for confrontation. As the reception unfolded, I noticed cracks in the perfect image Elise and James tried to present. Emma and her fiancé, Daniel, sat at the head table, but their interaction seemed forced. Emma's laughter and smiles appeared carefully rehearsed, meant for the benefit of onlookers rather than genuine joy. Something felt undeniably off from afar. I caught snippets of conversation. Elise, in her usual domineering manner, was loudly bragging about how she and James had graciously financed Emma and Daniel's wedding. Guests murmured their admiration, lauding their supposed generosity. However, I noticed Emma's strained expression as she overheard their boasts, her smile faltering under the weight of their words. Later, while wandering through the lush garden, I unexpectedly stumbled upon Emma and Daniel in a heated exchange behind a line of hedges. Their voices were low, but their emotions were unmistakable. "I can't believe you let them pay for everything," Emma said, her voice trembling with anger. "Now they think they own us." "What choice did I have, Emma?" Daniel replied, exasperation seeping into his tone. "We couldn't afford this on our own." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "They've controlled every aspect of my life, Daniel. I thought marrying you would give me freedom, but instead, it feels like I'm still trapped under their thumb." Hearing those words struck a nerve. For years, I remained in the background, convinced it wasn't my place to meddle in Emma's life. But now, it was clear that Elise's manipulative grip on her extended far deeper than I had imagined. It was time to act. As the reception wound down, soft music played in the background, and guests began to gather their belongings and exchange farewells. I lingered near the bar, sipping a glass of whiskey, my gaze frequently drifting to Emma. She was engaged in conversation with Elise and James, her body language tense. Her shoulders were rigid, and her hands were clenched tightly at her sides, speaking volumes about her discomfort. While I wrestled with whether to intervene, something, or rather, someone, caught my attention. A young server, likely a college student, was hovering nearby. His movements were jittery, and his eyes darted nervously toward Elise and James. He seemed on edge, his hands trembling slightly as he poured champagne for a nearby table. Our eyes briefly met, and he quickly looked away. Intrigued, I followed him as he stepped away from the crowd, catching up with him near the edge of the reception area. "Are you okay?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated, glancing around cautiously before leaning in. "You don't know me, sir, but I know them." He nodded in the direction of Elise and James. "They've destroyed my family." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" His voice wavered at first, but he spoke quickly, as though afraid he might lose his resolve. "My dad used to work for James's company. He was one of their best salespeople, until James accused him of embezzling funds. My dad lost everything, his job, his reputation. We had to sell our house, and my parents' marriage fell apart because of it." I frowned. "Did your father actually do it?" "No," the young man said firmly. "James framed him to cover up his own mistakes. My dad tried to fight back, but he didn't have the money or resources to take on someone like James." As he walked away, his words echoed in my mind. It wasn't just my life that James had ruined. He had left a trail of devastation in his wake, families torn apart by his deceit. And now, he was using his influence to control Emma. That night, sleep eluded me. The weight of betrayal, lies, and years of estrangement from my children bore down on me. But instead of despair, something stirred within me, an old but familiar sense of purpose, determination. The next morning, I made a call. I reached out to a trusted friend from my military days, now a skilled private investigator specializing in uncovering corporate wrongdoing. I needed solid evidence, proof of James's fraudulent activities and Elise's involvement. While my investigator began digging, I turned my focus to Emma. I called her, my voice steady yet gentle. "Emma, can we meet for lunch?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "I don't know, Dad. Things are complicated." "Please," I urged. "I just want to talk." After a brief hesitation, she agreed. We met at a cozy cafe near her apartment. When she arrived, I noticed how tired she looked, the spark in her eyes dimmed by stress and worry. We chatted about her wedding, her new home with Daniel, and her plans for the future. Slowly, I steered the conversation toward Elise and James. "They've always supported me," she said hesitantly, though her tone was uncertain. "They paid for my education, the wedding, everything, and what do they expect in return?" I asked gently, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Everything," she admitted in a choked whisper. "They control everything. I can't make a single decision without them." Emma sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as I reached out and held them. Emma, you don't have to let them control you anymore. You're capable, resilient, and stronger than you realize, and I'm here to support you. Her eyes welled with tears, a mixture of hope and apprehension. I'm scared, Dad, she admitted. I don't know if I have the strength to let go or to fight back. You can do this, I assured her firmly. And you won't have to do it alone. Over the next few weeks, my investigator unearthed a mountain of damning evidence against James. Embezzlement, tax evasion, bribery, it was all meticulously documented. Even more shocking was the proof that Elise had been a willing accomplice, aiding James in exchange for maintaining her extravagant lifestyle. When I showed Emma and Daniel the findings, Emma was initially in denial. She had always viewed her mother as a symbol of stability and strength. But as she combed through the documents, her face turned pale. How could she do this? She whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. How could she lie to me for so long? I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, Emma, I said, my voice heavy with regret. I should have fought harder to stay in your life back then. I let them win once, but I won't let that happen again. Together, we devised a strategy. Using the evidence, I anonymously alerted the authorities to James's illegal activities. At the same time, Emma and Daniel quietly cut all financial ties with Elise and James, ensuring their independence by paying off their debts. When the scandal broke, it caused a media firestorm. James's company collapsed under the weight of the investigation, and Elise's social circle quickly abandoned her. Their assets were frozen. Their reputation was ruined. And for the first time in their lives, they had no power to manipulate or control others. The final, public blow came during a charity gala, a desperate attempt by Elise to salvage her reputation. The room was filled with influential figures, all carefully selected in the hope of garnering sympathy and regaining some semblance of prestige. Emma took the stage, her presence commanding, her voice calm yet resolute. I want to take a moment to thank my mother, Elise, she began. The room hushed. For teaching me about strength, resilience, and integrity, values she and James have spent years undermining in their own lives. Gasps rippled to the crowd as Emma laid bare their manipulation, deceit, and crimes. Her words were deliberate and unflinching, peeling away the polished veneer Elise and James had spent years crafting. By the time she finished, Elise and James sat frozen in their seats, their faces ashen and their carefully constructed facade utterly destroyed. As Emma descended from the stage, she found me in the audience. Wrapping her arms tightly around me, she whispered, I'm finally free, Dad. And it's all because of you. In the months that followed, life slowly began to rebuild itself. Emma and Daniel thrived, creating a life founded on love, honesty, and independence. Lucas, now a teenager, reached out to me, expressing a desire to reconnect and rebuild our relationship. Little by little, the family I thought I had lost was coming back together. As for Elise and James, they faded into obscurity, stripped of their wealth and influence. Left to confront the consequences of their actions, they could no longer harm anyone else. For me, peace finally found its way into my life. Though the scars of the past remained, they no longer defined me. I had faced betrayal, loss, and heartache, but I had emerged on the other side, stronger and surrounded by a family that finally saw me for who I truly was. Life will always throw challenges our way. Some we choose, others are forced upon us. True strength isn't about avoiding hardship, but about rising after every fall. And when we fight for what we love with integrity, we heal not only ourselves, but also those we hold closest to our hearts. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing. Together, we can continue exploring stories that move and inspire us. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter of our journey.